and thanks for joining us. I'm Jesse Burst. I'm the founder of SmartGridNews.com, and I'm your host today for this latest in our Lessons from the Real World webinar series. That's where we share expertise and advice from people who've been there and done that. Got a great panel today on a very important topic, and I want to start with a special thank you to eMeter for helping make this possible. So here's the smiling faces of our presenters today. You can't tell it, but Steve is actually smiling in the dark there. In addition to me, we've got Chris King, who's Chief Regulatory Officer and, most importantly, these days, head of the eMeter's strategic consulting arm. Also joining us, Rick Morgan, a commissioner from the District of Columbia Public Service Commission, and Steve Sunderhoff from Pepco Holdings. I'll introduce them each in a little more detail as we go along. And here's what we're going to cover today, this very important topic. Smart meters, at least at many utilities, are the whole center of the smart grid, but it's easy to get the business case wrong. It's easy to make promises you can't keep. It's easy to miss value streams or risks and costs. And so we're going to delve into those things today. We're going to talk about identifying and valuing those benefits and costs. And equally, I think, interesting, we're going to take a real close look at a very important pricing pilot that took place at Pepco. So that's our agenda. We've got a lot to cover, so let's get started with the job of identifying and valuing benefits and costs of smart meters. And, you know, it's just so easy to overlook valid benefits or to value them incorrectly or to not know where to look for proof points that your regulators need to see. So these are just some of the skills and ideas that Chris is going to present to you today, and we're lucky to have Chris along. He's internationally recognized as an authority on smart meters and business case. He's called on by legislators, by regulators. He's testified to Congress, and he certainly knows whereof he speaks. Chris, thanks for joining us this morning.
Thank you, Jesse. I'm just going to jump right into this. In my presentation, one message I want to get out there is that there's a huge amount of information out there. It's not always that easily accessible, either to find or to understand or to, get pointed in the right direction, but it is there. So I would encourage anybody who is working in this area to certainly reach out and take advantage of all the good work that's been done. So if we look at the smart meter business cases, we can go back to the earliest ones, which were around advanced metering infrastructure, which is now called smart meters. I actually put together what I think was the first comprehensive AMI business case back in 1990, and it's evolved considerably since then. Many commissions have had working groups in this area. I chaired one in New York, as you can see, which was over 10 years ago, and another one at the California PUC more recently than that. And in 2003, California probably for the first time as a commission put out some guidelines on what should be included in the business case. And it's sort of an official approach on what functionality should be considered and what benefits. Since then, many commissions and utilities have looked at and developed business cases. And here's a listing on this slide of several that have been reviewed in detail by commissions and approved for rollout of smart meters to customers throughout service territories. This isn't a complete list. There are many more utilities that have done business cases and analyze them and approve them. And of course, making sure that it's cost effective is the critical public policy question in approving a rollout. So I'm going to cover at a high level, at a national level, what are some of the benefits of, well, really all the major benefit categories as well as the cost. And then Steve Sunderhoff at the end is going to give you some detail on Pepco's specific situation. So this is the high level, and then we'll delve into the specific there. And this comes from a very large database that I maintain on these from around the country, really around the world. So if you look from the utility perspective, and I wanted to start from that perspective, you have benefits, which are you see on the left in the green there, and then you have various cost categories in this so-called waterfall slide, coming up with the net annual benefits. So those cost categories, hardware, installation, software, other, and then O&M, gets you, in this case, those add up to much more than the utility operating savings, and you get a very negative annual benefits. This is an extrapolation from a number of utility business cases for the full U.S. 150 million electric meters. It runs about $5 billion a year in savings, and then the costs actually run about 12, so you get a -7 on the net here if you look only at the utility perspective. Now that can vary quite a bit. A number of utilities are actually positive in this sort of analysis. Probably the majority are not. And so what makes these business cases positive is going to the next perspective when we start looking at the societal perspective. And what you see here is you see several benefit categories, same cost categories, but huge net annual benefits of close to $60 billion. And I was going to make the point that you can express these things in a couple of ways. One is on an annualized basis, as I've done here. Another is look at net present value, which is a very common way, perhaps the most common way of doing this. So I have that $5 billion of utility operating savings over there on the left still. And then we start adding the societal benefits, reducing line losses in the grid, conservation voltage reduction, energy efficiency peak reduction through demand response, and then integrating renewables. And I'll give you specifics on each of those. All of those benefits, or almost all of those, flow to consumers. And so when policymakers look at this, clearly they need to look at the big picture. And it's also important to figure out how to make the utility whole. And in fact, utility shareholders should benefit as well in doing this, or it doesn't work.
Real quick question. Do its cost figures, one of our listeners asked, include the cost of in-home displays and in-home devices typically? Home area network?
They do not.
Okay, thanks.
Well, I say they do not, but on the my view on that is actually most of that is going to be happening through existing technology, meaning you're going to control your devices through a computer software program on your laptop. It'll probably be distributed for free, and that the home area network radios are going to be built into appliances that you buy. So over the long term, that cost will be very, very low, but it is not explicitly included there. So on this slide, this drills down into that first category of utility operating savings from one source, in this case expressed in monthly amounts per meter. And so you get $1.20 to a little over $6. Most of that difference, or a large part of that difference, is driven by a wide variation in estimated savings for reduced energy theft, which is in the middle of the chart. And you get, on a national basis, about $2.1 to $11.8 billion per year. I used 5 in the previous slide. And these are all well-documented categories, and they're well-documented approaches to quantifying each one of these. And, of course, they'll vary utility by utility, but this gives you a sense of what those specific categories are.
Question. Is a net annual benefit per electric meter a correct or proper or reasonable metric?
Yes, as I was saying, that's one way to describe benefits, another being the net present value. They're both used quite commonly.
Thank you.
This next chart is similar categories. There's some additional categories in this one. And this is based on a study by Capgemini based on actual deployments. So again, you see multiple things that get looked at here, and all this information is available for someone who's sitting down and putting a business case together. So now I'm going to turn to the societal benefits, and there are 2 of them in this grid operating efficiency category. People talk about smart meters and smart grids, and they're really these, I think there are 6 on my slide, 6 categories of savings. Relatively straightforward if you look at these. So when we talk about grid efficiency, what does that mean? Well, first, there's line loss reduction through managing and operating the lines better, eliminating or reducing energy theft, and solving equipment problems that are identified from having more data available. You can see the calculation on here. Typical losses in the distribution grid are about 7%. And various folks believe that you can get about a 15% improvement in that over time. You multiply those together, you get about 1% of U.S. retail revenues are $350 billion per year. So you apply the 1% and you get your $3.5 billion. I would also point out that whether you use the retail revenues in the calculation or you use wholesale costs is another thing to look at. So there are a number of different perspectives as you dive into the details, but the category really remains the same, though the end number that you come out with will be different depending on what utility you're looking at or how the state chooses to apply the numbers. So the second grid efficiency is an area called conservation voltage reduction. And right now utilities have to pump out voltage at the substation at a little bit higher level to make sure that the end voltage at the meter is sufficient and within regulatory requirements. So they build in a little bit of margin. With smart meters in place, and they measure voltage typically, you can operate the system more closely and reduce that margin. This is a McKinsey estimate of 2.5% that you could reduce the voltage on average, which gets you an additional $9 billion per year in savings. Now, I'm going to point out that McKinsey issued a paper recently where they estimated these two things and some other things at $63 billion per year. My number is far more conservative. As you can see, I've spent some time with them and asking them about the difference, and what they've kind of come back with is, well, we have a very complicated model with lots of inputs and outputs, and this is what it spits out. So I can't explain the 63 from them, and they weren't able to explain it to me, although I would encourage you to ask them about it if you're interested.